In last session, we have seen what is messaging and what is messaging system. And in this session, we will try to uncover why use messaging in enterprise integration solutions. As with any sophisticated solution, there is no one simple answer, but the quick answer is messaging is more immediate than file transfer, better encapsulated than shared database, and more reliable than remote procedure invocation. However, those are just the beginning of the advantages when we use messaging. More specific benefits include remote communication. As we discussed in the earlier sessions, integration is about connecting different computer systems which are oftentimes continents apart and make them communicate and transfer data between them through networks, and messaging enables them to communicate with each other, and it requires data to be copied from one computer to another computer, which is a lot more complicated. And messaging makes this data serializable by converting it into byte stream data and transfer the data between these computers via networks. And next advantage is platform and language integration. In enterprise integration, we will have to integrate different systems which use different languages, different technologies, and different platforms. And perhaps that is because these applications were developed over time by different integration teams. And integration have to integrate these divergent applications. And oftentimes, these applications have to communicate with the lowest common denominator, such as flat files with obscure formats. And messaging enables them to connect to the messaging system, and each computer or each system or each application with different language or platform or technology will interface with the messaging system to transfer data between the other applications which are taking part in that integration solution. The next advantage is synchronous communication. With remote procedure calls, the caller or the sender has to wait for the receiver to receive the message and process and send back a response or an acknowledgement, which will have different downsides or disadvantages. Whereas messaging enables asynchronous communication, and in case of asynchronous communication, the sender do not have to wait until the receiver receives the message and process it. It doesn't even have to wait until the messaging system delivers the message to the receiver. It will only have to wait until data is sent to the messaging system, and the messaging system stores the message in the messaging channel. Then the sender can go on to perform other works instead of waiting for the response or a reply from the receiver. And the receiver, when it processed the message and wanted to send an acknowledgement or send a response back to the sender or the caller, then it can send via different message, another message. And the sender, the caller or the sender has to handle those responses or acknowledgements using callback mechanism. The next advantage is variable timing. With synchronous communication and remote procedure invocation, when caller calls, the receiver it has to wait until the response or acknowledgement is sent back to the caller. And in this way, the caller can only process as many messages as the receiver can process in a given time. Whereas in asynchronous communication, the caller do not have to wait for the response or acknowledgement from the receiver. So caller can batch request the receiver and perform the other tasks without waiting for the receiver, and the receiver can send back, process those messages at its own pace and send back the response or acknowledgement using callback mechanism. And the next advantage of using messaging is throttling. In synchronous communication and remote procedure invocations, oftentimes the receiver can receive too many calls at the same time, which makes the receiver to crash and have performance degradation issues. Whereas using messaging, the receiver can handle or control the flow of the message in incoming messages and at the rate at which it can process without having any performance degradation, and the caller do not have to wait for the response or acknowledgement from the receiver, causing it to block all the threads it can process and also have performance degradation on the caller end. So messaging allows asynchronous communication and do not cause any performance degradation. And the next advantage of messaging is the messaging uses store and forward approach that we have discussed in the last session, which means that the messaging system will store the message before it forwards to the receiver. And when the receiver or the network has any issues or receiver is not available to take the message from the sender, then messaging system's responsibility to retry until it succeeds. And since the message is stored already, sometimes in memory and sometimes to a disk when we have an option to choose a guaranteed delivery, the store and forward approach uh, makes it more reliable than in synchronous communication or in remote procedure invocation, where the sender just forwards or moves the message from the sender to the receiver, and if there are any network failures or the receiver is not available, then the message is lost. And messaging system or messaging enables reliable communication without worrying too much about data loss. And the next advantage is a disconnected operation. And what this meant is there are certain business situations where some applications are designed deliberately to operate in a disconnected fashion, and when the system or application is available to connect to the other applications or the other systems, then the messages should not be lost during the disconnected operation. And when it reconnects to the network, it should process all the pending messages which are queued when it was operating in disconnected operation. For example, these applications range from applications which are deployed on PDAs, laptops, and automobile dashboards, or any operations personal's devices. They go onto the field to do some operations, and when they work on the field, they try to log their work into those devices, and the device, when it comes back to the enterprise and connects with the other systems in the enterprise, the messages that are queued inside during the work day of the operations personnel will be processed later in that day, or things like that. And messaging system also acts as a mediation layer. In other words, if we build an enterprise integration solution where there are multiple applications which are connected, not just like 10, 15 systems, maybe hundreds or thousands of applications in an enterprise application. And for example, if I have an application and I got disconnected from the network for some unforeseen situations, when the network is available again, I do not need to connect back to all the applications that are present in the enterprise integration solutions. I just need to connect with the messaging system, and messaging system will make sure I'm connected with all the different applications which I intend to connect with and communicate. And the last but not the least advantage is thread management. In case of remote procedure invocation or remote procedure calls, if there are too many calls on the receiver and the receiver is not able to handle or process the messages that are incoming, and all the threads will be blocked by the parallel jobs or messages that are received and on the receiver end, which will make it difficult to manage the parallel threads. Whereas messaging with asynchronous communication, the caller do not have to block the thread un until it receives a message or response or acknowledgement back from the receiver. Instead, it will close that thread and go on to other work, while receiver can take its own time to process the message, and whenever the acknowledgement or response is ready to send it back to the caller, it will open a new thread and send the response or acknowledgement back to the caller. This way, the thread management will be uh, optimal in case of messaging when compared to other integration approaches, like in case of remote procedure invocation, which are synchronous and real time. There is no place for delays in the communication if we opt for that kind of approach. I'll stop here and continue.